As one of the most popular and beloved characters that DC owns, Batman has inspired countless other characters, not just in comics, but all over various different forms of media. I'm actually pumped for you guys to see who is in at number 1, so don't you dare skip ahead to find out. I'm Adam Andrews with Top 10 Nerd, and this is the top 10 Batman knockoffs you will not believe. Let me know some of your favorite Batman-esque characters down below. But in at number 10 is Darkwing. Starting off this list with an extremely short-lived, obvious, and purposely on-the-nose knockoff of the Dark Knight is Darkwing from the Image Comics Invincible series. When we kick off that story, the world is defended by the Guardians of the Globe, an elite group of heroes who were very obviously based on the Justice League of America. The team is composed of the Immortal, who is similar to but inherently different than Superman, Red Rush, who is based on the Flash, Aquarius, who is based on Aquaman, Martian Man based on Martian Manhunter, the Green Ghost based on Green Lantern, and the two financiers of the team, War Woman based on Wonder Woman, and of course, Darkwing. Obviously, being one of the members who funded the team, Darkwing was incredibly wealthy. He was all dark and brooding, he wore a cape, he was in peak human condition, he relied on tech and his hand-to-hand combat skills, and he had cool one-liners. And none of that saved him from his very sudden sticky end. Number 9. Captain Sunshine. Captain Sunshine of the long-running Venture Bros animation series, while absolutely superpowered and brightly dressed, is such an obvious parody of Batman, and even more specifically, Batman Beyond. The current Captain Sunshine, Chuck Scarsdale, was actually the former sidekick called Wonder Boy of the original hero Desmond, who is now hella old and essentially acts as the Alfred to Chuck. This is extremely similar to how in Batman Beyond, Bruce Wayne becomes the mentor and guy in the chair to Terry McGinnis, who is the new Batman. But Venture Bros goes beyond all the other Batman knockoffs on this list by getting the actual voice of Batman, the late Kevin Conroy, to be the voice of Captain Sunshine. Actually, side note, if we're talking about Batman ripoffs voiced by Batmen, Adam West also did the voice of Catman on the Fairly Odd Parents, so that's a little fun fact for you. And moving on to number 8, Rorschach. Now look, there is indeed another Watchman that embodies Batman in some much less subtle ways. In fact, almost all the characters from Watchmen are a parody of another hero or villain from comic books in some way or form. The whole Watchmen story was made to deconstruct and satirize the idea of superheroes and to make a political commentary. Now while Rorschach himself was very obviously modeled after the Question, he is a much more gritty and brutal character who lives by such an extreme sense of justice that it makes me, and a lot of other people, believe that Rorschach's character is likely what would happen to Batman if he was real, or if he just went a little bit off the deep end. He is a hero that you root for, but you almost feel as though you shouldn't because of his anarchist ways, and while that is not exactly Batman, the grizzled ordinary man with a dark past who is a masked detective who sneaks into crime scenes and beats criminals to a pulp in the middle of the night, that's got Batman written all over it. Number 7. Nite Owl. With that said about Rorschach, we might as well talk about the much more obvious knockoff of Batman from the Watchmen comics, Nite Owl. Just looking at Nite Owl, you know he is meant to inspire the idea of Batman. Also, if you know DC Comics well enough, you probably know about Earth 3's Batman, aka Owlman or Thomas Wayne Jr., and the physical similarities there are obviously even more apparent. But Nite Owl is actually intended to be a parallel of Blue Beetle, which may surprise you, but it's because of the inherited nature of the Nite Owl name, the same way there have been multiple Blue Beetles. But Dan Drayberg is wealthy thanks to his inheritance, he's a regular guy, he has an underground lair, he's incredibly intelligent, creating owl-themed vehicles. The source of his power is almost entirely reliant on his technology, and his fighting style focuses more on incapacitation over the violence used by some other heroes. But man, he is pretty damn mopey like all the time, which does kind of line up with Batman, but never this much. Number 6. Nemesis. Mark Miller, not to be confused with Frank Miller, which is something I do all the time, created Nemesis with the whole idea of what would happen if you took Batman but did everything completely different. Essentially, it asks what happens if Bruce Wayne used his wealth and resources to become a villain instead of a hero. The smartest man in the world, as the only supervillain in the world, with vendetta against police in all countries and a revenge for a lost childhood. Now, we gotta say, it doesn't quite hit the mark you might think. It's not exactly the greatest comic book. It kind of relies on shock factor and overabundance of the overtop violence just for the sake of it, and of course the opposition to the character of Batman, but that makes Nemesis perfect for this list. He wears all white, has a super crazy cool cave, and relies on his tools, subtlety, and his massive intellect. I almost wish it was better, but unfortunately centering the comic around an evil, cocky Batman who isn't really that likable, it didn't work out too well. Number 5. Nighthawk. In 1996, Marvel created a whole team of villains who were direct knockoffs of DC Comics' Justice League with the Squadron Sinister. This team was created by the Grand Master after coming into contact with a team called the Squadron Supreme, who came from a different universe. The Squadron Supreme had direct Marvel versions of heroes like Superman with Hyperion, Wonder Woman with Power Princess, and among others, Batman with Nighthawk, aka Kyle Richmond. Kyle Richmond is a multi-billionaire whose riches were built through his father's criminal enterprises, leading him to choose to use the money for good instead of evil. He's got a cape, he has pointy ears, he's animal themed, and no matter which version we are talking about, the character is incredibly brooding and runs around at night. There are at least 5 well-known versions of Kyle Richmond in the Marvel Universe. The Squadron Sinister one, who eventually joins the Defenders, the Earth 712 Squadron Supreme version, the Earth 31916 Kyle Richmond, who was a black man whose parents were taken out by white supremacists, leading him to become an anti-racism vigilante, the Iron Man-like Ultimate Universe Kyle Richmond, and the Kyle Richmond of Earth TRN 852, which is not a regular part of the multiverse, but a magical creation of the villain Mephisto, where the Avengers never existed. Also, you have to call me Nighthawk. I just wanted to say that. Number 4. Big Daddy. Another creation of Mark Miller, not Frank Miller. Big Daddy appeared in the Kick-Ass comics and the movies, and speaking of the movies, in them, he looks like an exact replica of Batman, but he acts a lot more like the Punisher, meaning he is heavily armed and not afraid to use those arms at all. That's also the case in the comics, but here he has a completely different costume that does not reflect Batman. But he is still a knockoff of Batman for one big reason: Hit Girl. Hit Girl is actually Big Daddy's daughter, who he trained to become an incredibly capable assassin and sidekick, and this is a lot like Batman and Robin. Initially, we are led to believe that Big Daddy did this for revenge against a mob boss who caused the passing of his wife, but over time, we learn that was actually all a lie. His wife was very much alive, and he practically took his daughter and went off on the run, training her and going on missions with her, all to give her an exciting life, funding the whole thing by selling comic books and looting criminals. It's a really interesting idea of taking someone and manipulating and turning them into a crime-fighting sidekick, which is arguably something Batman does all the time. Number 3. Moon Knight. Originally, Marvel's Moon Knight did start as a Batman takeoff in the panels of Werewolf by Night, but good golly, he has become so much more, and I think I can speak for almost everyone when I say, thank the Lord he has. But since this is a Batman knockoff list, let's talk about what these two characters share. They both run around in the night as Knights of the Night, and that was fun to say. Both of these characters are very wealthy, and they use that wealth to fund their crime-fighting ways. They both wear capes, utilize themed tools, and they're both, on the surface, messed up psychologically, and that's kind of where the similarities stop. Talking about psychology, Moon Knight is way more distorted than the Caped Crusader. Almost all of his stories revolve around him struggling with his sanity and multiple personalities, and the rest of the superheroes know how insane he is. And then there's his backstory. Moon Knight was a mercenary who, at the end of his mortal coil, was chosen by an Egyptian god to be its avatar, which granted him super strength, durability, stamina, self-sustenance, immortality, and divine mystical empowerment. I think on the surface, it's easy to draw parallels between Moon Knight and the Dark Knight, but on the surface only. Number 2. Midnighter. Hailing from the Wildstorm universe, which is now under the DC's purview, Midnighter is one of the founding members of the Authority, which is a team just like the Justice League yet again, only I think I find this team to be less of a parody and more of a legit thing of their own. The Authority are actually really cool, and I'm super pumped that we will be getting them in the DCEU. Midnighter goes hand in hand with his partner and husband, Apollo, and together they are very clear nods to Batman and Superman. Now, obviously, in order for them to work as their own heroes, things have to differ a little bit. For Midnighter, while he dresses in all black, is incredibly stealthy, is an unmatched hand-to-hand fighter, and utilizes tech, he is incredibly violent, which is a huge no-no for Batman. I'm talking almost Punisher levels of violence. He also has actual superpowers. His main one is battle precognition, which allows him to predict how a situation will happen before it starts, running through a given situation millions of times in his mind before the first move is even made. All of his major senses are incredibly enhanced as well, and thanks to a series of crazy implants, he has super strength, speed, durability, reflexes, control over his pain receptors, environmental adaptation, and an insanely good healing factor. And in at number 1 is Darkwing Duck. He is the terror that flaps in the night. He is the awkward goodbye that lasts way too long. He is Darkwing Duck. Darkwing Duck, especially in the comics, is like the Tim Burton Batman movies fused together with Donald Duck. And then, to keep things not entirely a ripoff, there are dashes of pulp comics and Golden Age heroes like Dick Tracy and the Shadow, the Sandman, Doc Savage, the Green Hornet, the Flash, the Lone Ranger, and even Zorro. The fictional city of St. Canard is a direct parody of Gotham City, but what makes the whole thing just so much better is the whole screwball mentality of Disney's Talking Ducks. The show ran for 3 seasons from 1991 to 1992 and tells the adventures of Darkwing Duck, aided by his sidekick and pilot Launchpad McQuack. In his secret identity of Drake Mallard, which is a direct parody of Kent Allard, the alter ego of the Shadow, he lives in an unassuming suburban house with his adopted daughter Gosalyn. With his whole struggle being to balance his ego against his desire to be a good father to Gosalyn and to help do good in St. Canard City, which is a parody of Gotham City, like I already said. Yes, it is a parody, so it's openly being like, we're ripping off Batman, but it's for comedy, which makes it totally okay. And that's all the time I've got for today. I'm Adam Andrews, this is Top 10 Nerd. I'll catch y'all on the flippy flop. Peace out, nerds!